Okay, it's 1:32. We are, I think, just waiting for one more panelist from the Ministry of Forest, but I think all our main presenters are here, so I think we're just going to get started since we're just past 1:30 here. So it's Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. Welcome, everyone. This is a public meeting on post-wildfire hazards in the Shetland Creek wildfire area. My name is Colton Davies. I'm the communications manager for the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. We're hosting this meeting today from the Tecumseh to Secwepemc territory within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. I'll throw it to Ministry of Forest staff in just a moment, since they'll be leading this presentation today. So we do have several Ministry of Forest staff in attendance. We also have several TNRD emergency services staff. So we'll be able to support with recovery information and questions that come up. This meeting's being recorded on Zoom. When we're done, we'll have it uploaded to the TNRD YouTube page. So we'll save questions until after the ministry's presentation. So a quick note for Zoom as well. Many would probably be familiar. If you have a question, you can use the raised hand function on the bottom bar at any point, and we'll get to hands when we're ready to take questions. Or you can write questions in the public chat, and we'll aim to get to those in the order that they come in too. We can reiterate that in a little bit as we need to. But I believe it's going to be Gareth Wells presenting from the Ministry of Forests. So Gareth, you're welcome to, I'm assuming you'll need to share your screen to present, and you're welcome to go ahead if you're ready.
Okay, I've got my presentation loaded up here. Trevor, I don't know if you wanted to add anything off the top or if I should dive straight into my presentation.
No, I think you can just dive straight in, and yeah, we'll just open it up for questions as the TNRD wishes.
Okay, can everyone see my presentation in full screen?
Yep, looks good.
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Gareth Wells. I'm a geomorphologist for the province of BC with the Ministry of Forests, and I'm based here in Kamloops. I put together a bit of a presentation for Shetland Creek fire reconnaissance assessment that I performed a few months ago. Not too much off the top. We'll run through a brief introduction. I'll highlight some of the sort of principles underlying post-wildfire natural hazards, and then I'll go through the assessment process, and I'll finish off with a sort of run through some of the results. I haven't included all the results in this presentation. I'd direct people to the report itself, but I've sort of summarized some of the results based on individual watersheds. So the Shetland Creek fire was pretty substantial. Fire measurements, it burned almost 28,000 hectares, sort of bounded to the north by Oregon Jack Creek. It extends a ways up Murray Creek, particularly down in the southwest, and then down towards Spence's Bridge in the south, and it's bounded to the east by Highway 1, and then down towards the Thompson River, and it sort of extends through the Venables Valley. Off the top, I think it's important to sort of go over some of the driving mechanisms behind post-wildfire natural hazards. So in this animation on the left-hand side of the screen here, we see before the fire we have a stand of trees, and then and there's a little sort of diagram showing the soil at the base of the forest, and we should think of these elements really as a sponge or a protective layer. So when it rains, we have the vegetation, be it the forest or shrubs or things like that, intercepting water and soaking up some of that water. And then the water that does make it through the forest canopy or the vegetation down to the forest floor also gets soaked up by organic rich layers of the forest floor, the litter and the duff. So these elements protect the underlying soil from runoff, basically. So when it rains, they soak up the water and they release it slowly. So if we move down through the panel during the fire, the vegetation, be it the trees or the shrubs, are consumed or partially consumed, and the fire can also consume these upper layers of soil. And what happens then is when it rains, we have much more water reaching the ground surface. So it's not intercepted by the forest canopy, or it's not soaked up by these upper layers of soil. And what can happen then is with all this extra water on the forest floor, that water can transition into overland flow. So it can't infiltrate into the ground. We have much more water on the surface, and then on anywhere where we have any significant slope, this water can start to flow downhill. And that's where our most substantial post-wildfire natural hazards stem from. So once this water starts flowing across these burned hillsides, it can pick up ash or other debris left by the fire. And if it accumulates in sufficient volumes, it can start to erode out channels which it flows down. And these are the dominant trigger of post-wildfire hazards like debris floods or debris flows, which we're particularly concerned about. In these two pictures on this slide, we sort of illustrate what I've just been talking about. So this photo on the left is from the Gordon Creek drainage out along Highway 8 towards Merritt. Here we can see the forest has been pretty severely impacted by fire. There's very little canopy remaining. We don't see any live trees. And what little upper layers of soil, organic rich soil there were consumed. So a heavy rain event came through this area 1 year after the Shetland Creek fire in 2021. So this storm came through in August of 2022. And because of the loss of canopy here and the loss of these upper layers of soil, a significant volume of that water reached the ground surface, and it wasn't able to infiltrate into the ground, so it began to flow over land. And what we can see in the photo on the left is some fairly severe rills developing, so that erosion that I was referring to. Much of that water continued to flow down slope and collected in the draw, just sort of off in the distance in this picture. And that ended up triggering a debris flood, which headed several kilometers down the hillside, impacting highway, at least impacting as far as Highway 8 and some areas in the valley bottom. So this sort of illustrates the process I was just talking about. Much more water reaches the ground and then gets transported downhill. We can see these same sort of processes that we've seen in Lytton Creek and have been studying in the Venables Valley. This picture on the right is one that I took in late September. And we see signs here of overland flow developing. So I went out and had a look around in the field. I think it was a day or two after a storm came through out there. And we see some overland flow that's come down from a steep hillside, and it's transported ash and other debris from or left over from the fire. So we see these same sort of processes are active in the Shetland Creek fire. So I'll dive a little bit into the process underlying the assessment that we conducted. A lot of the principles are born out of Land Management Handbook 69. It's a government document that was published in 2015, which outlines the process for post-wildfire natural hazard risk analysis. I'm going to touch on some of the principles in the presentation, but this is a great document to refer to for more information. So twice in August, I went and conducted helicopter overview assessments of the fire. When we're flying around, we're looking for specific hazardous slopes or areas which have been burned particularly severely, and then trying to identify specific areas of concern. This photo on the left was taken in the Venables Valley. So I conducted 2 flights. It's quite a large fire and there's a lot to see. and we sort of triage down the specific things we need to look at in these helicopter overview flights. And then we supplement those observations with field work. So in this picture on the right, here's another look at some of that overland flooding that I saw in September in the Venables Valley. So when we're out conducting these field reconnaissance assessments, we're going out looking at more specific areas or areas we can't see well from the air. These might be stream courses or fans or areas where particular elements are located, like people's homes, for example. So we take those field observations and we combine those with a desktop assessment. The image in the bottom left of the screen shows burn severity mapping, which was conducted for the fire. That's done by examining changes between vegetation before and after the fire, and we get some idea about how badly these hillsides have burned and how badly the vegetation has been impacted. Once we've got this broad burn severity map, we can take that data and distill it down and look at individual watersheds. So in the figure on the right here, that pink line denotes an individual watershed. This one in particular is in the Venables Valley. And we'll examine what proportion of burn severity there is in that catchment. We'll consider how steep the catchment is and what existing channels there are. And then, we'll supplement that with our field observations. What do the channels look like in the field? Are there fans at the outlets of these channels? Are there deposits which suggest a sort of process, a dominant process? And we combine all these observations and analysis to come up with a hazard rating for a specific hazard and for these watersheds. And then we consider that in comparison with the elements at risk. So all that information, examining the hazard, feeds into this table. On the left-hand side, we have ratings from very low to very high, which consider the hazard, and then descriptions, which correspond with those ratings, and probability ranges from 0 to 1, 0 being no chance, and 1 being certain. So once we have the hazard identified, we consider the spatial likelihood of that hazard impacting a specific element. So if there's a house on a fan, we'll consider how likely an event is to come down, impact that fan, and impact the house. We rate spatial likelihood from low to high, low being it's unlikely that a specific event will impact the element, and high suggesting that it's probable. We then combine the hazard rating and the spatial likelihood in this matrix, this colorful matrix, and we come up with a partial risk rating. And in the bottom, I have an example here. So for this specific case, we have moderate hazard. We have a moderate probability of spatial impact, and we run that through the matrix, and we end up with a moderate partial risk. So this is how partial risk is determined in the level 2 report. So I'm going to summarize some of the results from the report, as I said off the top. I'm not going to go through every individual partial risk assessment. I'm just going to summarize sort of some of the more severely affected watersheds. These include Twall Creek, the Venables Valley, portions of Murray Creek, and some areas in the Three Sisters area. Outside of these areas that I'm not going to talk about, we saw sort of a mosaic of burn severities, patches of low, moderate, and some high. So I've really just focused on the most severe areas that were impacted by the fire. Dominant hazards that we're concerned about with these areas that I'm going to refer to are really runoff driven. And those are typically triggered by rainfall or rapid snowmelt. So the first area I've got here is the Twall Creek Valley. It's quite long. IR6 extends along much of Twall Creek Valley. And in the middle of the valley we saw fairly large swaths of hillside on both sides, burned at moderate and high severity. Here's a picture indicating as much. There are quite a few drainages which extend down either hillside, and we have concerns about runoff-related hazards, be it debris floods or debris flows, initiating on these hillsides and affecting things like IR6 or the road, which runs up and down the valley. The partial risk rating here is quite variable, in part due to the different topography along the valley, and the different proportion of burn. So this is one of the areas that we've recommended have additional study in the next level of assessment. At the outlet of Twall Creek, the Hilltop Campground is located right along the channel. Based on the proportion of burn in the watershed, I'm quite concerned about the likelihood of flooding, particularly in the spring. And based on the location of the campground being right along the channel itself, and having a history of flooding, I'm quite concerned about this site. This is one of the areas identified in the report as having one of the highest partial risks, in this case, a very high partial risk rating. Now, this is looking in the Three Sisters area along Hat Creek Road. This property, not sure if you can see my cursor, highlighted around here, is at the foot of a fairly steep slope, the upper portions of which were burned at fairly high severity. And the buildings on this property are located fairly close to the toe of the slope. The hazard here was rated as moderate, and due to the location of the buildings, a moderate spatial likelihood of impact was assigned, resulting in a moderate partial risk. The other properties in the area are, located sufficiently far away from the toe of these hillsides or on the north side of the valley, not to be at substantial risk. This is a sort of overview image of the Venables Valley. We can see here, I've got the burn severity mapping, and we see sort of fairly large swaths of red, which indicates high burn severity. You can see this on the mapping. You can see this if you have a look around the Venables Valley. The west aspect hillsides were really quite severely burned. And in some cases, almost all of the watersheds, nearing 100% of the watershed, these watersheds were burned. The major concern in the Venables Valley is that a lot of these rural properties have many different structures on them, many outbuildings or homes. And some of these homes are located at the outlets of fairly large fans. And these fans are areas where water has flowed historically, but maybe not for quite some time, or maybe not since the area last burned. And my concern is that after the fire, we might see substantially more water coming down the hillside, and we might experience water flowing where we haven't seen it flow before, and that water might impact some of these residences. So far, we've seen signs of overland flooding, as I've shown in some of my pictures from September. Of greater concern, at least in the defined water courses, is the likelihood of debris floods or debris flows. So again, this is another area that jumps out as fairly high concern, and we've identified for the next level of assessment to consider. Murray Creek is another area we're rather concerned about. Large portions of Murray Creek have a sort of mosaic of burn in them. Some areas, particularly near the outlet, look like this. There's a large portion of Murray Creek Road to consider in the next level of assessment. I haven't considered it fully in my level 2 assessment. We want to pass that along to the next level of assessment. The hazard in Murray Creek varies along the road in particular. One of the elements, or one of the things we're particularly concerned about, is the likelihood of flooding. and potential impacts to water intakes at the outlet of Murray Creek. So, as I've highlighted here, there's fairly broad concern in a number of different watersheds that were severely burned. I think the most pressing concerns are in the Venables Valley, and then in Twall Creek, and then Murray Creek, and then some additional concerns out in the Three Sisters area. It's important to understand that these hazards are fairly imminent and pressing. You know, we expect these hazards, you know, they're a threat now with rains that we could be experiencing into the winter. They're a threat through the winter if we have a warmish winter and have a fair bit of rain and less snow. And they continue to be a threat into the spring when we see snow melt. It's important to know that these hazards, they won't last forever. They're the most sort of pressing in the first handful of years after the fire. In my experience, from what I've seen in fires in the wider area, most of the post-wildfire natural hazards, the particularly damaging ones that we see, occur in the first year or two after the fire. There have been many post-wildfire debris floods and debris flows in the Lytton Creek fire in the first and second year after the fire. So we see the threat sort of diminish over time as vegetation begins to come back in the watershed. It's important to note that in some of the most severely burned areas, those that are burned at high severity, there might be a considerable delay in vegetation returning to these hillsides. So those hazards in those areas might persist for a longer period of time. But generally speaking, we see the hazards begin to fall off after 1 to 2 years. With that in mind, you know, long-term hydrologic recovery should be anticipated to take much longer than that. You know, we might be talking decades, we might be talking hundreds of years. It's challenging to know what sort of conditions we'll experience, particularly under climate change, and how long it will take to grow back, you know, forests in these areas. It might take a very long time. But in the meanwhile, before, you know, long-term hydrologic recovery, there are some effects that we should be mindful of, particularly in the amount and the timing of runoff we might see in streams and rivers in the area. For example, we might see elevated spring flows. I anticipate, at least over the short term period, we'll see elevated summer flows in these areas where we've had large scale mortality of the trees. They're no longer intercepting runoff. They're no longer soaking up water out of the ground. And in my experience, based on some of the other fires that I've worked on in the past few years, we see substantially increased summer flows. So again, water flowing in areas where we haven't seen it before. So these are some things to be mindful of. In summary, if you aren't already aware, these assessments are posted on the public-facing Post-Wildfire Natural Hazard and Risk Hub. You can look at fires throughout the province, I think back to 2021, and pull up level 2 assessments and then level 3 assessments. So the plan at the moment is to have a level 3 assessment conducted for the Shetland Creek fire. And once that's complete and published, it'll be available here on the Post-Wildfire Hub. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you're not already familiar with it. Thanks. Yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions. If anyone has any specific questions about you know, individual things that are considered in the level 2 assessment, please reach out directly or send me an email.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I think I'll just explain the timeline for the next level quickly. So we have tendered the level 3 assessment. So that can be undertaken by ministry staff, but it's more commonly undertaken by a consulting engineer or geoscientist. And so we've reached out to yeah, a few well-known and well-versed practitioners in this field in the area, and that bid opportunity closes, I believe it's November 1st, and so we'll select somebody very shortly after that. There is a requirement for the field work to get started by the 14th in November. We know that it takes time to do field work and then sit down and write up a report. So we wouldn't expect to see a finalized report until January. However, there is a requirement if the consultant goes out in the field and undertakes the field work, if after getting back to the office, I'm talking about mid to late November, if something looks really shocking or alarming, we ask that they provide a memo to us, just outlining that information, brief 2-3 page memo that will get out to the communities, the TNRD and the First Nations through EMCR. And we can kind of work together on next steps so that we're not waiting for a final report in January, to get moving on any next steps. Because next steps can be, we often talk about things like public information. So obviously putting the information on this public website is a good step. We do put signage on public roads. We do determine if there are areas that are maybe unsafe for stopping and might put up particular signage on roads that would say, no stopping between here and here, sort of thing. There is often a recommendation from the consultant that weather-based early warning systems are put into place. So we can't presuppose that'll happen, but if that is a recommendation, then the communities can work with EMCR or Indigenous Services Canada to look for opportunities to fund those systems if that's something they want, because it's completely up to them. So those are just some of the next steps that could move forward. We typically don't go out on the land base and build things like deflection berms and that sort of thing on Crown land. Like Gareth says, the risk, while it can persist for longer than sort of 2 years, you can well imagine that by the time we undertake any sort of efforts to fund these types of activities and get them in place, we're probably past the greatest sort of danger zone, and then you're left with this contrivance on the landscape that either has to be decommissioned or maintained in perpetuity, which is typically not that useful of a situation. So I just want people to know that that typically isn't something that happens. We have tried things like aerial seeding in the Highway 8 area. That wasn't overly useful. We still had debris flows happen in areas that were seeded. We do see green up happening quite well in areas that have been burned. Say from the 2021 and 2023 fires. But we're always looking at opportunities, to advance the field of sort of mitigative treatment. So I won't say that we may not undertake something, but there was really no magic bullet out there to reduce the risk on the landscape. I mean, it's typically around awareness of the potential for the types of rains that would trigger these flows, and just spatial awareness of where you want to be if these types of rains or happen, or if we're, for example, see rapid onset of snowmelt due to unseasonably set of high temperatures in the spring, for example.
Okay, great information. Thank you, Trevor and Gareth, for the presentation and the follow up there as well, Trevor. That's good to know that if there's something that the field workers find that's imminent that people need to know from an awareness side, that uh, late November, it sounds like that would be an option for getting that info to residents if needed, to us, to residents through us. And then a report early in 2025 is well in advance of issues that the spring for Shet would cause potentially in areas. Um, so I think we'll go now with the Q&A being done, or sorry, with the presentation being done, to Q&A. So I've seen questions start to get asked here, and so those listening, feel free to use the raise hand function if you have a question that you want to say out loud, or you can just start typing it in the chat. Either way works. So Radha has a question in the chat. We lost our home in Venables Valley and moved into a place 2 doors down. They've already experienced water movement threatening the new housing situation they're in. I have seen the video that Radha posted about that a couple of weeks ago, I believe. So the question is, what should we be doing to prevent that since the forest above us is quite burned? Thank you. Is that for the ministry? Is that for us, Kevin?
Hey, Colton, sorry, can you hear me?
Can hear you. Yep.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I had a bit of issue with my headset there. So I think it's going to be there's sort of twofold here. There's the what might be happening upslope, and then what the situation is going to be on the individual properties. In terms of upslope, that's largely going to be Crown land. So it would be something that we would be working with the province on to see if there are options for some works to be done that would be of utility for folks in terms of stemming this down the road. When it's on the private property, it's going to be kind of the individual homeowners in terms of what the best approach is going to be. If water is going to be getting there, what can be done to divert that or to mitigate that? We'd likely recommend that you secure some sort of a professional, whether it's a structural engineer or potentially a hydrologist who could, look at what could be done on your individual property. And then in terms of kind of the broader picture, that'll be a conversation that, is going to be ongoing with us in the province, kind of as this unfolds. Trevor, is that fair to say from your opinion?
I think so, Kevin. I mean, we'll wait to see the report from the consultants as they look at these areas in more depth and have any recommendations for treatment. Those will be considered. Yeah, but that's typically the case. Sometimes yeah, as we know, it does come down to if something structural was required, that would be something that would typically have to be maintained by local government. We know that typically requires a service area to build and maintain those types of structures, and those typically don't get approved in the service area voting process because folks typically don't want to end up having to pay a portion for those structures. So and that's why I say we typically don't see structural mitigation undertaken in these types of situations. It's just not something that the government does on Crown land, and typically on private land, folks just find it a little bit too costly to undertake themselves. Not something that's easily done by regional districts. So again, we'll just be waiting for the consultant report, to indicate if something, yeah, really was deemed to be of use as some sort of a treatment on the landscape, and then through meetings facilitated, community recovery meetings facilitated by EMCR, the local governments and us would put our heads together on how to try and solve that problem.
Hey, thank you, Trevor and Kevin, for the answer, and hope that helps Radha with the question you had. And so I don't see any other questions right now, but just a quick reminder, you can use the raise hand function or you can type in the chat. Both options are at the bottom bar on your panel on your screen if you wanted to do that. We have, again, ministry staff who you've heard from, and our TNRD staff, Kevin Skrepnik, Mike Knopf, and our recovery manager, Dale Kronbush, are on the call too. I know many affected landowners have been in touch with Dale directly on and off over the last many weeks. I don't see any other questions. Kevin, Trevor, Gareth, did anyone else have any comments you wanted to add at this point before assuming we might be about to wrap up here?
I have one comment to add, or for those people who live out in these affected areas, I'd love to hear from you. If you see, water flowing in your backyard where it hasn't before, I'm just down the road in Kamloops and interested to learn more or see more evidence of these post-wildfire natural hazards. So I'd encourage you to reach out or send some pictures through, and that's the kind of thing we'd like to come out and have a look at.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Appreciate that, and appreciate all the information you've been able to share here on your screen. I'm going to see if I can. Let me see if I'm able to share my screen really quick. If you're able to, I'll stop Gareth's screen sharing there, and let me see. I just don't see any more questions, so I just want to show folks really quick where we'll be posting this YouTube link. If anyone wants to rewatch or look up the video to share after the fact, we'll share it on our TNRD social media. But we have a web page here, tnrd.ca/wildfire-geohazard-reports. And we have a list of other TNRD area wildfire hazard reports that we've archived onto here when we get them. So you saw from Gareth the list that was there for province-wide where they do these assessments, and when we have TNRD communities affected, we'll share those here. And so we have the Shetland Creek fire listed here. The full report that that Gareth was referencing in his presentation can be found right here, and we'll have the meeting recording, the link posted right below that. Quick question that's come in here. I'll stop sharing my screen. Questions from Marla. If a tree's blackened, what are the chances of it coming back to life?
Maybe I can speak to this. In my experience, very low, unfortunately.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of trees like that, obviously, in the Venables Valley after the Shetland fire. Just giving it another sec here to see if we have any other questions, and feel free to put a hand up too, even if you're typing, so in case I take it away. But I don't think we see any other questions. So Gareth had his email on the screen there. Gareth.wells@gov.bc.ca if you wanted to reach out to the Ministry of Forests. You could also reach out to emergency@tnrd.ca if you had questions for us. Many folks have probably gone through Dale directly too, which is TNRD recovery@tnrd.ca. Reminder too, Gareth and Trevor, I believe, will be joining us and sharing the same presentation in person at meeting tonight at the Cooks Ferry Band Office beginning at 6 o'clock. That's located on Deer Drive in Spence's Bridge. And our same TNRD staff on this call will be at that meeting too. It will be exactly the same that is in this meeting for what's shared there. But again, the recording of this meeting will be up on our YouTube page within a few days, and that meeting tonight will be in person only and not recorded. So thank you for taking part, and thank you to the handful, Gareth, Trevor, and other ministry staff who have taken the time out of their day for this call. So thank you everyone for taking part, and take care.
Thanks.